New book, new book, new book. Actually, a very old book. Felix Holt, The Radical, George Eliot. George Eliot is easily one of my favorite 19th century authors. She is just up there with like Charles Dickens and Mark Twain in terms of kind of her ability to craft a world in a novel. She's amazing. And if you've never heard of her, George Eliot is actually her pen name. Her real name is Marianne Evans. She's a very dense read. She's like, she just has a really strong command of putting a sentence together in these really long sentences that are just, it's like kind of like a symphony, her novels. It's just so much packed into them. There's some things I don't like about her writing, but for the most part, she's amazing and very powerful. And after reading this, it makes me want to go back and reread what I have read by her, because she only has like 7 novels. I've read 3 of them, I believe. Middlemarch, Silas Marner, and this one. And they've all been really, she just has such a control of the language. And some of it's a little slow. She does take like a chapter, like a lot of 19th century novels, to just kind of lay the scene and get the picture going about what's going on in this countryside. But for the most part, I love her writing. Her characterization is incredible, and she's wonderful. Yeah. What I like about this book a lot is that it has multiple layers of kind of what she's talking about, the conflict and the storyline. So there's this very political storyline. There's this election coming up as kind of the working class is getting more representation. And I don't claim to be a history major, so this is kind of I could learn some more about this to understand it. But for the most part, I understand the idea that there's the Tories that are really conservative, and there's the Whigs that are a little more liberal, or fairly more liberal, and then there's people like our Felix Holt here, who is very radical. He's even more to the left of the spectrum than the Whigs. So this is a time when socialism was becoming like a common idea, and the idea that the state had a responsibility to its citizens is really what she hammers home in this. And there's a character like Felix Holt who's very political, or he's very radical in his ideas, but he's not very political actually. And then there's another character who is running for office as a radical, and he is kind of the embodiment of what you kind of suffer, or what you succumb to if you do go into politics, because Felix Holt is kind of able to maintain his ideals by not being political and not going to that extreme. But then, so there's a big commentary on what goes on in the political process, which this is the year for that, definitely. So it's very relevant and very, very timely, actually. A lot of it seems like the whole process of what our government's responsibility is to the individual is, that's what we haven't figured out, obviously, because, anyways. So in addition to this political storyline, there's also kind of a romantic storyline that, every 19th century novel kind of requires this, a love story. And it was good. It was enjoyable. It wasn't totally as, it didn't feel like her strength. She's definitely more of an author of ideas, I think, than of romance. So it's kind of not her forte, but she does include it, and it does work to a degree. The only problem with it I had was, I think, the ending. I'm not going to go into what happens, but it just felt a little too Hollywood, I guess, the ending. It didn't feel right. I almost thought it was a dream sequence when I first read it. It just felt so out of place in a way. So maybe her editors kind of pushed that on her, I don't know, but I didn't totally buy into it, but I still enjoyed the book as a whole. Probably the biggest flaw or thing that I would change is this, there's a huge backstory about this inheritance that is, that's kind of a standard trope in 19th century fiction. Charles Dickens, Great Expectations, has this character who has great expectations. He's going to inherit this amount of money, and that's this inheritance idea comes up a lot in Victorian fiction. And it's okay to use it as a device, but the problem in this book was that it's kind of really convoluted, and I couldn't follow it at all. I followed it to a degree to get the point across, but it becomes a little too convoluted. And I think when that's the case in a story, when something like that happens, is you just have to simplify it to get the point across, because the point isn't to make the reader understand the entire legal process of Victorian England. It's to tell a story. So I would have simplified that a little. I think Dickens does it very well in Great Expectations, but I think in this book, George Eliot, doesn't quite handle it in quite the same way. If you're going to read this book, actually, I would recommend the Penguin edition, which is not what I read. I read some Wordsworth Classics edition, which has basically no notes and no additional material. But the Penguin edition, which I'll link to below, it has a long section by the editors explaining the legal ramifications of what goes on in the story. So I think I would love to go back and reread all George Eliot, because she is amazing, and read that edition, because I think it would help clarify the legal points in my head. I would recommend this book to anybody who likes, for example, like I said, Charles Dickens and 19th century fiction in general. It's just a rich storyline, about 400 pages. I intend to at some point go back and read through all of her fiction, starting with Adam Bede. And yeah, she's amazing. Her writing, when you just get into it, it's just so perfectly written. It's lovely. If your preference is for kind of more modern fiction and you just want to cut to the chase, don't read this, because yeah, she spends like a good 20 pages just setting the storyline without any characters. So it's definitely a slower pace than you may be used to in modern fiction. So, but if you do like a challenge, go for it. She's amazing. There's no one quite like her. I'll have another review in a few days, I think. I hope. It's Craig Thompson's massive graphic novel, Blankets. So yeah, check my channel for more soon. Thanks.